we're going to be making this simple skirt. This is just a rough sketch that I made. So I'm gonna make a straight skirt, but at the end of it I'm gonna have pleats at the bottom of the skirt.
Welcome to the Learn to Sew Academy channel. Please remember to subscribe. Thank you.
So our skirt is going to have zipper at the back. We're not going to have a band, so we're doing a bandless skirt. This is also the same method you use when you're doing just a straight skirt. The only difference is that we're adding pleats at the bottom of the skirt. Now to start, I always advise that you go through your measurements and make sure you know what you need. You had all your allowances to know what you need to cut when you start to cut your fabric. So the first thing is we're going to be working with a waist of 37, a hip of 44, and a skirt length of 23. Now, because we'll be folding our fabric into fours, so we're dividing by 4. So our waist 37, we're going to divide that by 4. That gives us 9.25. Now at our waist, we're going to have what we call a dot at the waist. So that will be 1 inch on each side. Remember, we're folding into 4 parts. So whatever we do to one part happens to the next part. So we have 1 inch for the dot. We're going to add that for our waist measurement. And we also add 1 inch for our seam allowance. Some people prefer to use like half an inch. Some may want to use 1 inch. It depends on what you prefer to do. But if you're a beginner, I always advise that you start with the 1 inch seam allowance. I'm going to just put SA here for a seam allowance. Some people call it sewing allowance. It's all the same. So now our total is going to be 11.25 inches. That's what you're going to be measuring. And I always advise people, don't be too quick to cut your fabric. Think it through before you cut. Don't just rush to cut your fabric so you don't cut it wrong, especially if you're a beginner. Now the hip is 44. Divide by 4, that gives us 11. On the hip, we need to add just the sewing allowance or the seam allowance of 1 inch. So that's going to give us 12 inches. That's what we need for our seam, for our hip measurement. Now for the skirt length is 23, and because it is a length, you don't need to divide anything. It's just all of this length. The only thing though, since I'm not making the straight skirt all the way to the bottom, since there's going to be some pleats over here, my pleat is going to be 4 inches in length. So because I have 23, I'm just going to take away the 4 inches. So this right here is going to be 19 inches. That's from the waist down to just the top of my knee, so that it can give me ease of movement. So we're going to do 19 inches. So that's why we have 19 inches. And the rest is of course 4, because if you add 4 with 19, you'll get your 23. Now to get started, you need your fabric, of course. You need your scissors. You need your chalk or a fabric pen. You also need a measuring tape. These are the things you need, and you need a ruler to draw your lines. The one thing you want to do before you start, you want to identify the wrong side of your fabric, because you mark on the wrong side. You want your chalk to go on the wrong side, not on the right side of the fabric. So the first thing I do is I folded this fabric into 2, going by the amount of measurement that I have. I know that I need to measure a waist of 11.25 and a hip of 12. So I'm going to fold this in a way that I will have 12 inches across from the middle to the side. I want to have 12 inches. And when you fold, we're folding into 4. So you first fold into 2, and then you fold it again. But this time you make sure you leave some allowances. Some allowance for your zipper. This is what this is right here. So I'm leaving like 1.5 to 2 inches for your zipper allowance. That's what this is. And then you want to make sure when you measure from here, you have your 12 inches. So if you measure and you have the whatever your hip measurement is supposed to be, you measure it. We're measuring from the center because this is going to be the center. This is going to be where our zipper is going to be, which is the center back, and this is the center front. So what I'm going to do now, I have my 12 inches. I'm just going to cut this fabric out so I have less fabric to work with. And before I do that, I'm going to measure my 19 inches. If you remember, the length of my skirt is 23 inches, but I'm going to use the lower part, which is 4 inches. I'm going to make them pleats. So I just need to cut my straight skirt to be 23 minus the 4 inches for the pleats. That's 19 inches. So I need to cut 19 inches over here. But as I cut the 19 inches length, I'll be adding half inch for my seam allowance at the bottom and half inch at the top where I'm going to be adding. So what I'm going to measure here, it will be 20 inch total, 19 plus half at the bottom, half at the top. So you just measure your 20 inches all the way across and you mark it. Then you just join your lines. And the next thing you want to do now is just to cut it out. So I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to cut it out at my 19-inch mark. This is just to make it easier to work with the fabric since I have a lot more fabric. So I'm just going to cut out the piece I need. Now I'm going to measure for the waist. The waist is 11.25. This is after we've added the darts and the seam allowance. So I'm going to measure 11.25. Now from the waist to the hip, the standard is around 8 inches, right? But remember, I'm going to take half an inch of seam allowance at the top. So I'm just going to do roughly 8.5 inch. This is just to mark where I start to measure for my hip. That's the only reason I'm doing this. I'm measuring this 8.5 to know what point to measure for the hip. So now my hip is 12 inches. And then again, I'm starting from the center. I start to measure from the center. So my 12 inch is going to be from the center down. This is my 11.25 mark, and this is my 12 point mark. So I just want to join your waist to the hip. That's what you need to do now. You connect the waist to the hip. Now for the bottom, to join it to the bottom, I'm just going to put a very little slant just to give it a little pencil shape. If you prefer, you can just cut it straight down at the 12-inch mark and then you just have a straight skirt. But I just want a tiny little dent at the bottom just to give it a little shape down there. So I'm just going to slant it a little when I do my mark right here. So this from here to here is just going to be a little bit short of my 12 inch, and that's intentional. Again, you can decide to just do your 12 inches across right at the bottom too and just do a straight skirt right there, but I just want a little bit of pencil. Now I'm going to cut this shape out and I'm going to have my front panel and my back panel. Now one thing I always do is I put a notch here just to know where your center front is, okay? And then another thing we need to do is to measure the dart. We want to measure the dart point. So we know that our dart from the center, normally your dart is around 4. You want to do 4 from the center. You measure 4 for your dart. But because we're going to be holding it in, we are holding half in on both sides. Remember, we left 1 whole inch for the dart. So just do 4.5. This is where your dart is, so that when you're taking your dart, you're gonna do half this way and half this way to give you the 1 hole that we left for the dart. what we're gonna do is just to notch it just a little. Just want to cut it just a tiny, just to show you where you do your dot when you start sewing. We need to do the lower part, which is our pleats. So what we need to do is just to get a straight strap of fabric that's going to be 4 inches wide. And what I'll normally do is, it depends on how much pleat you want on it. Like this, I have roughly like 11 and a half. Usually I can double that, and if you like, you can just do like 1.5 of whatever you want. So my 11 and a half is going to be a total of 23 inches. When I open it up like this, I'm going to have a total of 23 inches. Remember, out of this 23 inches, we have 1 inch seam allowance on both sides. So technically, we have less than 23 inches when we finish sewing. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here now, if I remove my 1 inch sewing allowance on both sides, I'm gonna have like 21. So I'm going to double that. It depends again on how much pleats you want on it. I'm gonna do like double of that for my pleat. I'm gonna measure 4 inches. I'll just fold this into 2 just to make the measurement shorter. Now remember that at the bottom of it, you need to put an allowance for your sewing, because we're going to turn the bottom in twice when we finish sewing. So that's 1 additional inch to our 4 inches for the lower part of the skirt. So that's going to give us 5 inches right there. Then at the point where we are joining the pleat to the skirt, we need another half inch. So altogether, we're going to be cutting 5.5 inches. That's what we need to cut from here. And just cut it across. So this right here is what I'm going to use for my pleat. This is just one part of it. This is like for the front. So I'm gonna cut another one exact like this for the back, because again, like I said, I want my pleats to be deep. So I'm gonna cut another piece exactly the same size for the back. So I just need to place it on the remaining fabric and cut that out. So that's it for the cutting. Another thing I always want to mention is, you always mark the wrong side, so that when you start sewing, it's easy for you to identify the wrong side of your fabric. For my skirt, since I'm not putting an external band on this, I'm gonna use another fabric to turn it in so that I have a smooth edge at the top of the skirt when I'm done. So what I'm doing is, I'm just taking another fabric. I folded it into 2 because I'm gonna cut this into 2 along the width. Now this is to turn it in. It's gonna have like a facing. I'm gonna use it to turn in my skirt so that I have a smooth edge. So I'm just gonna place it on top of this and cut it out. That's my back panel. I'm just cutting them into 2 to give me 2 separate ones. Since my back panel is in 2, remember for the zipper, I had to have it in 2s like that. I'm marking the wrong side. And then there's the top of the front panel. I need this to not be divided in the middle, because my front is not divided in the middle. I'm just gonna check it against this. I need it to be the same length as the back facing. I'm just gonna use this from the back to measure how much of the front fabric to cut. for my facing. So that'll be for my front. I do hope this video has been very helpful to you. Please be sure to leave this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please remember to subscribe to this channel and click the bell for notifications. Thank you so much. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye.